She heard the words again, whispered like a quiet verdict that clung to her uniform more tightly than rank ever could. She's just the cook. Why did it sting more this morning than all the others? Maybe because she knew something they didn't, something no one had cared to ask. Ellie Harris, 27, with sandy blonde hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, stood over a steaming tray of eggs in the forward operating base's dining hall. Around her, soldiers shuffled in half awake, still carrying the weight of missions they hadn't spoken about. She ladled food onto plates, eyes darting to every detail, the twitch of an exhausted hand, the vacant stare of someone who hadn't slept, the way silence often said more than words ever could. And always they walked past her with the same assumption: support staff, reliable, invisible, replaceable. They didn't know she noticed everything. How could they? She had grown up in the backcountry of Montana, under skis so wide and unbroken they could swallow a person whole. Her father had been a Marine sniper instructor who believed in lessons delivered with the weight of silence and a rifle in hand. Ellie could hit steel at 800 meters before she had a license to drive. She could move through woods so quietly a deer wouldn't turn until it felt her breath. She learned patience not from books but from dawn hunts that lasted until dusk, when hunger pressed at her ribs but the elk never came. But none of that showed when she tied an apron around her waist and filled trays for men who thought courage only came with a combat patch. "Outstanding chicken, Harris," Chief Marcus Johnson said once, leaning on the serving line like he was doing her a favor by noticing. "You've got a future in restaurants when this is all over." She smiled politely, the way she always did, hiding the sting. He'd never seen her fire a weapon, never trained with her on land navigation, never even thought she could. He saw a cook, nothing more. That morning, as she cracked another egg and heard the murmurs in the line, she wondered, not for the first time, if she'd ever escape that label. But life has a way of answering questions brutally, and sometimes sooner than expected. The alarm ripped through the dining hall, urgent, sharp, unmistakable. Radios crackled with clipped voices. "All personnel, this is base command. SEAL Team 7 has been ambushed and captured during patrol operations. 12 personnel confirmed held at enemy compound, 5 kilometers northwest of Vanguard. Quick reaction force mobilizing. Stand by for further orders." The hall froze, forks hovered midair. Soldiers stopped chewing, the silence was suffocating. Captured, the word carried a weight heavier than death. The enemy didn't usually take American operators alive, and if they did, it was for a reason no one wanted to think about. Ellie felt her pulse climb. She lowered the ladle, wiped her hands, and listened harder to the radio chatter. The details sharpened like glass: 12 SEALs, a fortified compound, 50 enemy fighters. Execution planned within hours. The enemy would make a spectacle of it, film the deaths of America's best and broadcast them across the world. The quick reaction force was spinning up, but the briefing said what she already knew. They needed at least 3 hours to coordinate, move, and strike. 3 hours. The SEALs didn't have 3 hours. She stood still in that crowded hall, but her mind was already elsewhere, tracking the terrain northwest of base, remembering her runs along the ridgeline, the gullies she'd memorized, the blind spots the compound guards never saw. She knew every fold of that land, knew it like she'd hunted it all her life. The decision formed not in her head but in her bones, quiet, absolute. She was going, alone if she had to. Ellie walked out of the dining hall without a word. No one noticed. She slipped into her quarters, shut the door, and let the cook's apron fall to the floor. In its place, combat utilities, body armor strapped tight, an M4 carbine she knew as well as her own heartbeat. She packed water, ammo, a knife, and nothing she couldn't carry at a dead run. When she opened the door, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was standing there, surprise etched across her face. "Harris, what the hell are you doing?" Ellie met her eyes steadily. "Those SEALs don't have 3 hours. The QRF will be too late. I'm going now." You're a culinary specialist, not a shooter, Mitchell snapped, lowering her voice. This is suicide. You'll never make it out alive. With respect, ma'am, Ellie's voice didn't waver. I grew up in Montana. My father was a Marine sniper instructor. I can move through worse terrain than this without being seen. I can shoot better than half the combat arms out there. And if I don't try, 12 Americans are going to die. Mitchell blinked. She had read Ellie's file. She knew the scores, but hearing it now, seeing the steel in her eyes, it was different. I can't authorize this, Mitchell said finally, her voice breaking just slightly. She reached into her vest, pulled out a spare radio and pressed it into Ellie's hands. Officially, you're ordered back to duty. Unofficially, stay on comms. I'll cover your absence as long as I can. Harris, she paused, swallowing. Bring them home and bring yourself back. Ellie nodded once tight, then disappeared into the dust and heat. The world outside the wire was hostile in every sense, heat pressing down like punishment, silence broken only by the hum of insects and the distant chatter of rifles carried by men who would kill her without hesitation. She dropped low, moving the way she'd been taught since childhood. Each step considered, each breath measured. She stopped often, blending into rock and shadow until even the wind seemed louder than she was. It took 2 hours to close the 5 kilometers. 2 hours of inching forward, heart drumming but steady, mind locked on the image of 12 men tied up in a courtyard, waiting for death. At last, through her scope, she saw them. The compound was worse than she'd feared. Sand-colored walls ringed with firing positions, fighters posted at intervals, vehicles idling in the shade. In the middle, 12 figures bound together. The SEALs, bruised, bloodied, but alive for now. 20 guards ringed them. 30 more manned the perimeter. 50 men in total, each one armed, each one confident that no rescue could come in time. Ellie slowed her breathing, pressed her cheek to the stock of her rifle, and let the world narrow to a single point of focus. The cook had arrived. She keyed the radio softly. This is Harris. I have eyes on the compound, all 12 prisoners alive, 50 hostiles total, execution preparations underway, engaging plan now. Mitchell's voice cracked back, urgent, pleading. Harris, wait for the QRF. They're 2 hours out. Don't do this alone. Ellie's finger tightened on the trigger. Negative, ma'am. 2 hours is too long. Harris out. The first shot whispered into the hot air, a suppressed crack that dropped a tower guard before his body slumped silently to the floor. She shifted, moved, waited, and fired again. Another guard at the gate collapsing with no sound but the dust he kicked up. She moved with the rhythm of the hunt. Fire, relocate, breathe, wait, fire again. In 30 minutes, 8 men were down. The perimeter was leaking. Gaps widened. No one knew from where death came, only that it came silently, with precision from a ghost they couldn't see. But the easy part was over. Ellie wiped the sweat from her brow, eyes fixed on the bound SEALs in the courtyard. Guards ringed them, rifles slung lazily, bored but present. Any wrong move would see Americans gunned down before rescue even began. She steadied her breathing, let the seconds drag out until the guard rotation shifted. One moment of distraction, one instant of vulnerability. Her rifle barked, then again and again. 6 guards fell in 15 seconds. The courtyard erupted into confusion, fighters diving for cover, shouting in languages Ellie barely understood. The prisoners ducked low, alive, unharmed, waiting for anything that looked like hope. Ellie snatched a captured radio off a fallen fighter's belt, keyed it, and spoke into the chaos. SEAL Team 7, friendly forces conducting rescue. Cut your bonds, move south wall, covering fire in place. For a heartbeat, silence. Then she saw movement, Chief Johnson working his restraints loose, slashing ropes off his teammates, urgency replacing disbelief. They surged toward the wall like men reborn, driven by instinct, by survival, by the realization that someone, anyone, had come for them. And as Ellie reloaded, calm, precise, covering their escape, she knew this was only the beginning. Because if they made it out alive, the world would finally ask the question she'd been waiting for all her life. Who was Ellie Harris really? Chief Marcus Johnson nearly stumbled when he vaulted the compound's south wall. Dust stung his eyes, lungs burning, but what he saw waiting for him stopped him colder than any bullet could. Ellie Harris. Not in an apron, not in the shadows of the dining hall, but in full combat gear, rifle raised, movements crisp and calculated. A cook, holding the line against an army. "Rescuing you, Chief," she said flatly, scanning the ridgeline. "We need to move." Johnson's brain fumbled for words. "You're a cook," her eyes flicked to him, sharp and unflinching. "We'll talk later, South Ridge, now." It was madness, but in that moment, madness was all they had. The 12 SEALs, still weak from days of captivity, scrambled into motion. Ellie led the way, her strides measured, her rifle lifting to sights with the confidence of someone who'd been here before, just never in uniform, never in their world. Gunfire split the silence. Enemy fighters had spotted the escape, swarming the courtyard, pouring toward the south wall with shouts that cut like blades through the air. Ellie dropped to a knee, fired, shifted, fired again. She wasn't shooting to spray fear. She was picking men off one by one, each shot deliberate, each body collapsing where it stood. Johnson ran beside her, his mind fractured between disbelief and urgency. He'd seen rookies crack under less. He'd seen seasoned operators falter when the odds stacked too high. Yet here was a culinary specialist, just the cook, moving with a sniper's patience and a hunter's calm. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he muttered between breaths. "Montana," she said. Her voice was flat, steady, as if this were the simplest answer in the world. "Keep moving." The team pushed into the ravine, shadows swallowing them. Enemy fire raked the rocks overhead, wild, unfocused. Ellie's movements never faltered. Her rifle barked when needed, silent when not. She directed the SEALs through cover with hand signals so precise it stunned them, signals she should not have known, yet somehow did. But beneath her focus, beneath the training etched into her bones, another voice whispered, the one she'd buried for years. "What if I fail?" It wasn't fear of death. That she'd made peace with long ago. It was the fear of confirming what everyone already believed, that she didn't belong, that she'd overstepped, that she was just the cook who thought she was more. She shook it off, forcing her breath even. One task, one step, keep them alive. When they reached a narrow defile, she raised her fist, halting the group. Johnson crouched beside her, eyes narrowing. "What's wrong?" "They'll flank us," she whispered. "They know this terrain better than you do. They'll try to cut off the exit at the ridgeline. If we move now, we'll walk straight into them." Johnson frowned. "And you know this how?" Ellie's eyes didn't move from her scope. "Because it's what I would do." Silence stretched heavy. Then Johnson gave the smallest nod. He was starting to believe. Ellie repositioned, sighting in on a ridge 300 meters ahead. Through the shimmer of heat she caught movement, fighters sliding into place exactly as she'd predicted. She exhaled, let the rifle steady and pulled the trigger. One dropped. Then another. The rest froze, disoriented, convinced a sniper team was watching them. She seized the moment. "Move now." The SEALs surged forward, following her down the ravine. For the first time since their capture, hope sparked in their eyes. Not because the quick reaction force was coming, not because the Navy had a plan, but because one underestimated sailor had refused to wait. Minutes blurred into hours. The chase stretched on, enemy fighters relentless, pushing harder with every shot fired. But Ellie knew terrain. She knew patience. Every time the SEALs thought they were cornered, she found a fold in the rock, a dry creek bed, a thicket of brush just thick enough to hide movement. Still, it was wearing on them. Exhaustion bled through their bodies, their captivity having stolen precious strength. They stumbled, cursed, groaned under the weight of rifles they could barely carry. Ellie caught Johnson's arm when he faltered. Rally point's less than a kilometer. Hold on. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. You shouldn't even be here, but you are, and without you we'd be dead. She said nothing, because what answer could she give? That she'd been preparing her whole life for a moment no one thought she'd ever face. That all the nights she'd lain awake wondering if she'd chosen the wrong rating suddenly made sense. That maybe, just maybe, she wasn't a fraud, but exactly what the moment demanded. Instead, she just kept moving. When the rally point finally came into view, a flat patch near the ridge with enough cover to hold, they collapsed into position. Weapons trained outward, chests heaving, adrenaline still surging. Ellie keyed her radio. This is Harris, package secured, rally point reached, standing by for QRF. Static answered. Then Mitchell's voice ragged with tension. Copy Harris, QRF inbound, 30 minutes out, hold position. 30 minutes. It might as well have been a lifetime. Because the enemy was coming. The SEALs dug in, reloading magazines with shaky hands. Ellie crawled to the edge of the ridge, scanning the approaches. Shadows flickered in the distance, fighters closing in, drawn by blood and fury. She steadied her rifle, exhaled. They'll be here in 5. Johnson crouched beside her, his face tight but alive. Then we make 5 minutes count. The first wave hit like a storm. Bullets shattered rock, dirt spat into the air, shouts echoed through the canyon. The SEALs, weakened but not broken, returned fire with everything they had left. Ellie was everywhere at once, shifting positions, calling out targets, her rifle spitting controlled bursts that cut down men who dared push too close. She wasn't reckless. She was deliberate, calculated, calm in a storm that had swallowed stronger men whole. And yet, for all her control, something cracked inside her. Not fear, not despair, something sharper. The memory of Chief Johnson, days earlier, smiling at her across the serving line, telling her she had talent for chicken. This is who you thought I was, she raged silently. A cook, a shadow, an afterthought. Each shot she fired was more than survival. It was reclamation. A demand to be seen, not as a job title, not as a woman in uniform, not as someone filling plates, but as a soldier who refused to let 12 men die because no one else moved. The fight dragged on. Minutes felt like years. The enemy pushed harder, closing the gap, trying to overwhelm the thin line holding them back. And then rotor blades. The sound was faint at first, a whisper against the sky, then louder, heavier, undeniable. The quick reaction force. Black Hawks swept in low, doors open, machine guns thundering. The enemy faltered, broke, scattered like leaves in the wind. Soldiers roped down, sweeping the area, securing the ridge with practiced efficiency. Ellie lowered her rifle, shoulders sagging. She bought them enough time. When the dust cleared, Johnson turned to her. His face was unreadable, shame, awe, gratitude tangled into something he couldn't name. You, his voice cracked, you saved us. Ellie didn't meet his eyes. She just checked her weapon, ejected the spent magazine, and said softly, we should move. It's not over yet. Because even as the helicopters lifted them from the ridge, even as the SEALs clutched the freedom they'd thought lost, Ellie knew the real battle hadn't even begun. The enemy wasn't out there anymore. It was waiting for her back at base. The questions, the accusations, the doubt. What was a cook doing in combat? Who had given her the right? And why did it take walking into hell alone for anyone to finally see her? The helicopters touched down hard on the landing pad at Vanguard, kicking up a storm of dust that clung to sweat and blood. The rescued SEALs stumbled out first, exhausted but alive. Their faces told the story before their mouths could: captivity, near death, and the impossible chance of survival. Ellie Harris followed behind, rifle still in hand, eyes scanning like the fight wasn't over, because to her it was. As her boots hit the tarmac, a wall of eyes fell on her. Soldiers, sailors, command staff. None of them knew yet what they were seeing. To them, she was the cook who'd gone missing from the chow hall hours earlier. Now she stood shoulder to shoulder with the SEALs, dust-caked, weapon-scarred, alive when logic said she shouldn't be. Whispers started immediately: disbelief, confusion, suspicion. Is that Harris? The cook? What the hell is she doing with them? Ellie kept her chin level, but inside, a tremor ran through her. She wasn't afraid of bullets or blades, but this was the battlefield she had never learned to prepare for, the judgment of her own. Commander Patricia Hayes, head of the QRF, strode forward with clipped steps. She didn't waste time. Harris, she said, her voice cold steel. Report. Ellie snapped to attention, rifle across her chest, dust still swirling. Ma'am, confirmed 12 American prisoners held at enemy compound. Executed infiltration, neutralized hostiles, extracted survivors to rally point. QRF completed recovery. Hayes stared at her for a long, suffocating silence. Behind her, Johnson cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said hoarsely, that's accurate. She saved us, all of us. Ellie felt the weight of his words, but Hayes's eyes never softened. You were not authorized for combat operations. You abandoned your post. You acted outside your chain of command. The truth landed like a hammer, but Ellie didn't flinch. Yes, ma'am, I understand. And just like that, the moment fractured. The SEALs, battered and bruised, clustered together, their gratitude unspoken but fierce. Yet command staff pulled Ellie away as if she were some liability to contain. She walked alone down the corridor of headquarters, every pair of eyes following her like a verdict. For 12 men she had been a savior. For the institution she served, she was a problem. They put her in a small room, 4 walls, 1 chair. The kind of place where silence was sharper than any blade. Hours passed. No questions. No explanations, just waiting. When the door finally opened, it was Captain Richard Morrison, the investigating officer flown in from higher command. Tall, composed, every step deliberate. He sat across from her, laying a file on the table. Her name was stamped across it. Petty Officer Harris, he said, his voice measured, calm in a way that made it heavier. Do you know why you're here? Yes, sir, she answered, steady. Unauthorized absence from duty, unauthorized combat operations. And his eyes didn't leave hers. And endangering myself outside mission parameters, she added. Morrison nodded once but didn't write anything down. 12 SEALs are alive because of your actions. That part is not under debate. What is under debate is whether your actions were courage or recklessness. Ellie's throat tightened, but she kept her face still. Reckless. That was what they would call her. Not brave, not skilled, not necessary, reckless. Tell me, Morrison leaned forward, voice low. Why didn't anyone know you were capable of this? Why did a culinary specialist carry out an operation trained SEALs would hesitate to attempt? Ellie hesitated. She thought of her father, of Montana hunts, of years spent hiding her abilities behind ladles and serving spoons. She thought of the countless moments she'd swallowed her pride when someone dismissed her. Because no one asked, she said finally. Morrison's eyes flickered, but his expression stayed unreadable. You had choices, Harris. You could have pursued combat ratings. Why hide in the kitchen? Ellie breathed slow. Because women in combat roles fight twice as hard for half as much recognition. I saw it happen. I chose culinary so I could serve without every step being a debate about whether I belonged. I wanted to be where the fight was without being a symbol. But it meant, when the fight came to me, no one believed I was ready. The words hung in the room, heavy, undeniable. Morrison leaned back, studying her. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, he stood. We'll continue this tomorrow. Get some rest. Rest, the word felt almost cruel. That night, Ellie lay on her bunk in the quiet barracks. Outside, the bass hummed with low voices, with the rhythm of life continuing as if nothing had shifted. But she knew everything had shifted. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every second of the rescue. The shots, the movement, the voices of men who had believed they were dead until she pulled them back from the edge. And yet doubt gnawed at her. Had she been reckless? Had she gambled 12 lives on pride, on a need to prove herself? Or had she simply done what had to be done when no one else would move? Her chest tightened. She had saved them, yes, but would she lose herself in the process? The next day, the investigation deepened. Testimonies poured in. Lieutenant Mitchell spoke on her behalf, recounting Ellie's hidden qualifications, the advanced scores, the tactical training most culinary specialists never touched. She said plainly what others avoided. Harris has capabilities we ignored. We judged her by her rating, not by her skills. Chief Johnson, standing bruised and worn, added his voice. She saved us, period. Without her, we'd be dead. I don't care what her job title says. But for every voice that supported her, another questioned. Officers muttered about discipline, about precedent, about the chaos if everyone decided to go rogue when they felt they knew better. The weight pressed heavier each day. Ellie sat in that room, listening, waiting, knowing her future balanced on a knife's edge. One night she stood outside alone, desert wind curling around her. She thought of Montana skis, wide and merciless. She thought of her father's words, "Patience wins hunts, Ellie, but sometimes patience costs the prize." She had acted because she couldn't bear the cost of waiting. But now, she wondered if she was the one being hunted by a system that saw her courage not as salvation but as defiance. Inside her chest, two truths warred. She was proud, she had saved them, she knew that mattered. But she was broken, too, because in the eyes of many she hadn't proven her worth. She'd proven she was dangerous. And in the lonely hours, with only the desert wind for company, Ellie whispered the question she could never escape. What if all she had really done was prove them right, that she didn't belong anywhere? The days blurred together under fluorescent lights and clipped voices. Ellie Harris was no longer moving across ridgelines or cutting through shadows. She was trapped in conference rooms, questioned under the sharp edge of military law. The Navy knew how to measure violations. They had words for it: unauthorized absence, dereliction of duty, failure to follow lawful orders. Cold words, clean words, words that erased the dust and blood of what had actually happened. But the Navy had no words for a cook who brought 12 SEALs home alive. The contradiction twisted like a knife in every hearing. "Petty Officer Harris," Captain Morrison asked one morning, voice calm but piercing, "why did you take it upon yourself to act without command authority?" Ellie sat still, hands folded, eyes fixed ahead. "Because, sir, the SEALs would have been executed before the QRF arrived. I had skills no one knew about. I acted because time was gone." Morrison leaned back. "And what if you had failed? What if instead of saving 12 you lost 13? The silence after that question pressed harder than bullets. Ellie felt it cut deep, because the truth was he wasn't wrong. She could have failed. And then what? The Navy wouldn't be calling her reckless. They'd be writing her name on a memorial wall. Every answer she gave felt like a double-edged blade. Either she was arrogant or reckless. Either she overstepped or she disobeyed. Never just necessary. And the weight of that truth gnawed at her when the lights went out at night. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying to hear her father's voice in the back of her mind. "Patience, Ellie, trust yourself." But another voice drowned him out. "What if they're right?" The SEALs tried to break through the walls that were closing around her. Chief Johnson, bandaged but upright, came to her once between sessions. His face carried the lines of guilt and gratitude in equal measure. "Harris," he said quietly, "I owe you my life. We all do. I'm not going to let them bury this." Ellie shook her head. "Chief, it doesn't matter. I broke protocol. I knew what I was doing." His jaw tightened. "You knew what you were doing because no one else would. Don't you dare downplay that." But she could feel it. Beneath his anger, there was still confusion. Still the echo of that line he'd once spoken with a smirk. You'd make a great restaurant owner someday. Even now, with his life in her hands, part of him was still reconciling who she was. And that reconciliation wasn't just his, it was everyone's. Whispers spread through the base. Some called her a hero, others a liability. Some said she had saved 12 SEALs, others said she had risked the reputation of the entire command. The truth was, both were right. At the hearings, Lieutenant Mitchell was the only officer who spoke with steady conviction. She laid out Ellie's record: expert marksman scores, advanced tactical training courses completed, survival skills beyond her rating. She chose culinary specialist, Mitchell said firmly, not because she lacked capability, but because she wanted to serve without carrying the burden of constant scrutiny as a woman in combat arms. We failed to see what she brought beyond her job title. That failure almost cost 12 lives. Her words cut through the silence like a blade. But for every nod in the room, Ellie saw another face tighten with skepticism. Tradition did not bend easily. One evening, after hours of testimony, Ellie stood outside the barracks again. The desert air wrapped cold around her shoulders. She looked up at the stars, countless and indifferent, and let herself finally breathe. Tears burned her eyes, though none fell. She thought of Montana nights, of campfires with her father, of learning how to steady her hands in the biting cold until a rifle shot felt like part of her breath. Those lessons had carried her through the compound. But here, in the face of policy and precedent, they felt almost useless. Because here patience wasn't survival. Here, patience was punishment. She whispered to the night, though no one could hear her, "What more do I have to prove?" The wind didn't answer. The breaking point came 2 weeks into the investigation. Captain Morrison called her into the room again, file in hand. His voice carried no warmth. "Petty Officer Harris, after thorough review, we have concluded you did violate multiple regulations. You abandoned your assigned post, acted without authorization, and conducted combat operations outside your rating. For that, you will receive an official reprimand on your permanent record." The words hit like a hammer, permanent, a stain she would carry for the rest of her career. But Morrison didn't close the file. He looked up, eyes fixed on her. "However," he said slowly, "we also acknowledge that without your actions, 12 Navy SEALs would be dead. For extraordinary heroism, you are being recommended for the Navy Cross." The room seemed to tilt. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. A reprimand and a medal, condemnation and recognition, punishment and honor. Her mind spun. Which was she, reckless or heroic, liability or savior? Morrison studied her as if he saw the storm in her chest. "You need to understand something, Harris. The Navy runs on order, on discipline. You broke that. But sometimes," his voice softened almost imperceptibly, "sometimes the line between insubordination and courage is thin. You walked it. You'll live with both sides of that forever." He stood, closing the file, dismissed. She rose, saluted, and walked out on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Outside, the SEALs waited. Chief Johnson, bruised but standing tall, met her eyes. "Well," he asked. Ellie forced a breath. "Reprimand, Navy Cross." For a second, disbelief flickered across his face. Then slowly he nodded. "Sounds about right. They never know what to do with someone like you." The others gathered close, gratitude etched in their silence. One of them, Mitchell, his lips split and healing, spoke quietly. "You saved us, Harris. Don't ever forget that." But Ellie wasn't sure she could believe it. Not yet. That night she sat on her bunk again, medal recommendation still echoing in her ears, reprimand weighing heavier. She held her rifle across her knees, hands tracing the grooves like prayer beads. Pride and doubt clashed inside her, relentless. She had acted because she couldn't stand still. She had saved lives, that was truth. But she had also crossed a line, and that truth would follow her, branded into her record, into her identity. Was she proud? Yes. Was she broken? Yes. Both truths lived side by side, refusing to give ground. She closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cold metal of her weapon. The desert wind slipped through the thin barracks walls, carrying dust, carrying silence. And in that silence, Ellie understood something she hadn't before. Sometimes victory doesn't come with cheers. Sometimes it comes with scars, with reprimands, with whispers that never leave. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The Navy Cross was placed in her hands weeks later, cool metal resting in her palm like something unreal. A crowd clapped politely, cameras flashed, officers shook her hand with rehearsed words about valor and sacrifice. Ellie stood at attention, uniform pressed, eyes steady, but inside she felt hollow. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism. The reprimand in her record whispered louder. Both truths tangled in her chest, neither letting her breathe freely. When the ceremony ended, she slipped away, leaving the sound of applause behind. Medals were easy to pin. The silence that followed was heavier. She found herself in the mess hall, the same hall where it had all begun. The clatter of trays, the hum of conversation, the smell of food she'd once been responsible for. She sat at a corner table, medal still in hand, staring at it until the shine blurred. A voice broke through. "That's not where it ends, Harris." She looked up. Commander Patricia Hayes stood across from her, expression sharp, unreadable. "What do you mean, ma'am?" Hayes slid into the seat across from her. "Special Warfare Command has reviewed your case. Against precedent, against tradition. They're offering you a chance." Ellie blinked. "A chance?" "Selection," Hayes said simply. "Special warfare, training pipeline. Few outside combat ratings ever see it. Almost none from support specialties. But your actions proved capability. They want to see if you can do it officially." The words landed heavy. Training, selection. The thing she'd quietly dreamed of but never dared speak aloud. Ellie's throat tightened. "And if I fail?" Hayes didn't flinch. "Then you fail, and you go back to cooking, but at least you'll know. At least the Navy will know." Ellie stared at the medal in her hand. The reprimand in her record burned in memory. And beneath it all, the whisper that had followed her for years. "She's just the cook." She closed her fist around the medal. "I'll do it." Special warfare selection stripped everything from her. Sleep, comfort, identity. The instructors didn't care about medals, didn't care about heroism. They cared about today, about now, about whether she could drag her broken body one step farther when everything screamed to stop. They called it Hell Week. Days without sleep, miles with sand grinding into skin, hours of carrying boats on their heads until skulls felt split open. The ocean swallowed her whole and spat her out shivering, lungs burning. Men twice her size dropped out. Some cried. Some simply went quiet and walked away. Ellie kept moving, not fast, not strong, just steady. She heard her father's voice again, Montana wind curling around his words. "Patience wins hunts. Patience keeps you alive." So she was patient, patient with pain, patient with doubt, patient with the voices around her. Because the voices came, just like always. She's only here because of that stunt. She's a liability. They're testing politics, not skill. Cook, not going to last another day. The words sliced deeper than the salt water in her blisters. She'd heard them before in different forms, but here they stung sharper. Because this was supposed to be the place where she proved herself. And still, she was an outsider. One night, bone cold and shaking, she lay in the sand with the rest of her class, waves crashing over their bodies, instructors shouting. She felt her chest heave, her vision blur, her body begging to quit. She turned her head. Next to her, a trainee whispered, "Ring out, Harris, go back to cooking. No shame in that." Her teeth clenched. Shame, the word burned. She thought of the seals tied in that courtyard, waiting for death. She thought of Chief Johnson's face when he realized who had saved him. She thought of the silence of command, calling her reckless even as they pinned a medal to her chest. She whispered back through chattering teeth, "Shame is waiting while 12 men die." The trainee said nothing more. Ellie endured. Day after day, night after night, she carried boats, crawled through sand, pushed her body until it bled. Not with anger, not with defiance, with patience, with quiet, with the simple refusal to stop. And slowly something shifted. The instructors stopped calling her the cook. They started calling her Harris, then petty officer, then just Ellie. Recognition didn't come with cheers. It came in silence, in nods that said you belong here if you can keep going. By the end of selection, only a fraction of her class remained, exhausted, changed. Ellie stood among them, shoulders raw, hands blistered, uniform soaked with salt and sweat. She wasn't celebrated. She wasn't coddled. She was simply acknowledged. And in that quiet, it was enough. Months turned into years, training pipelines, specialized schools, survival courses, medicine, demolition, navigation. Ellie absorbed it all with the same patience that had carried her across Montana ridges and enemy compounds alike. Her past followed her, of course. The story of the cook who saved SEALs became whispered legend. Some treated it as inspiration, others as scandal, but Ellie didn't feed it either way. She carried the story like she carried her rifle, silently, steadily, always ready but never displayed. When she finally deployed again, this time as part of a team, not a cook, not a ghost, but a combat medic, the shift was almost invisible. She patched wounds, carried stretchers, fired shots when needed. She was no longer proving. She was simply doing. Still, late at night, lying awake in canvas tents under foreign skis, doubt visited her. Would they ever see her as more than the cook who got lucky once? Would she ever truly belong in the brotherhood of warriors who had bled for decades before her? The answer never came. Instead, what came were missions, patience, blood on her hands, lives she saved and lives she couldn't. And in that rhythm of war, Ellie realized the truth she had been chasing for years. Belonging was never given. It was earned, every day, quietly, without applause. One evening, after a firefight that left 2 of her teammates wounded, she sat outside the aid tent, hands stained red, uniform torn. Chief Johnson, older now, grayer, walked up beside her. He didn't smirk this time. He didn't patronize. He just sat in silence for a long while, the desert wind carrying the weight between them. Finally, he said, "I was wrong about you." Ellie's throat tightened. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "You weren't wrong, Chief. You just didn't see the rest of me." He nodded slowly. No one did. The silence after was not heavy. It was something else, something almost like peace. Ellie knew she would never escape the label completely. To some, she would always be the cook. To others, the reckless sailor who went rogue. To others, still a hero. But to herself, finally, she was just Ellie Harris, a woman who had refused to stand still while others died, a woman who carried scars no metal could weigh. And as she stared into the fading light, she realized belonging wasn't about being accepted by everyone. It was about being able to look at herself and not turn away. But the war wasn't done with her. The desert winds still whispered of coming storms, missions that would test her more than any selection ever had, situations where she would face not only enemy fire but the relentless question that haunted her still. Was she enough? And in that haunting, the story of Ellie Harris was far from over. The desert at night was a black sea, broken only by starlight and the faint glow of red lenses on the helmets around her. The team moved in silence, boots sinking into sand that swallowed sound. Ellie Harris kept her place in the formation, rifle low, eyes sweeping the horizon. This was different from the night she'd gone alone into the compound. Then she had no team, no rules, nothing but instinct and desperation. Tonight she was not the cook who went rogue. Tonight she was a designated member of the team, a medic, an operator. And yet the pressure pressed tighter now than it ever had before. She wasn't here because of trust. Not yet. She was here because command had ordered it. The men around her respected the patch on her shoulder but still questioned the person wearing it. She could feel it in the glances that lingered too long, the silence that stretched between them. Every step whispered the same unspoken question: does she really belong? The mission was simple on paper: a joint patrol along the border of hostile territory. Intelligence suggested weapons smuggling, possible staging grounds for ambushes. The goal was reconnaissance, maybe interdiction if they found targets of opportunity. Simple, except in war, nothing ever stayed simple. Ellie's hand stayed steady on her rifle, but her mind drifted back to Montana, to nights where the woods swallowed her whole, to the weight of her father's lessons. Stay patient. Stay quiet. Trust your eyes. Your weapon will tell the truth when no one else does. She trusted that. It was the only anchor she had left. The patrol moved into a narrow wadi, shadows rising high on either side. The air grew cooler, the kind of chill that made sweat turn sharp against skin. The team leader, Senior Chief Alvarez, raised a fist. The column froze. Ellie crouched low, scanning, ears straining for something, anything. Then she heard it, a scrape of stone, a whisper of movement too deliberate to be wind. Her rifle lifted, eyes narrowing on a dark shape perched against the ridge. "Contact 12 o'clock high," she whispered. Alvarez's eyes flicked to her, then followed her scope. He saw it too, a fighter, rifle slung, watching. The ambush broke before the team could react. Gunfire erupted from both ridgelines, tracer rounds cutting through the night like burning arrows. Sand exploded around them. Shouts echoed off stone. "Take cover," Alvarez roared. The team scattered, pressing into what little cover the wadi offered. Ellie dropped beside a boulder, rifle barking, controlled bursts snapping targets off the ridge. She didn't think. She didn't question. She just moved, the way Montana had taught her, the way the compound had demanded. Beside her, Petty Officer Rourke cursed, clutching his thigh. Blood poured through his fingers. "Medic," he gasped. Ellie slid to him without hesitation, pulling her kit. Bullets cracked overhead, but her hand stayed steady. Tourniquet high, twist tight, check pulse, pack the wound. Her father's voice came again: patience, precision. Don't rush when it matters most. "Stay with me," she murmured, eyes flicking up long enough to drop another hostile on the ridge. "You're not going anywhere tonight." Rourke groaned, but his breathing steadied. His eyes, wide with pain, locked on hers, and for the first time there was no doubt in them, only trust. Alvarez's voice cut through the chaos. "Harris status." "Rourke stable," she shouted back. "We need a vac within the hour." "Copy, hold until extraction." The fight stretched on, brutal and unrelenting. The team fired, maneuvered, returned fire in waves. Ellie moved between them like a ghost, patching wounds, firing when needed, calm where panic might have lived. But inside, the ghosts clawed at her. The courtyard, the bound seals, the look in Johnson's eyes when he realized who had saved him. Her chest tightened. She wasn't just fighting the enemy on the ridges. She was fighting the memory of being alone, of carrying 12 lives on her shoulders, of knowing one mistake would have damned them all. A shout broke her trance, Alvarez again pointing: "Harris, 2 o'clock." She spun, sights snapping into place. 2 fighters flanked low, rifles raised. She fired once, twice. Both dropped before they could squeeze triggers. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of radios and the heavy breath of survivors. The enemy broke, scattering back into the night. For a long moment no one moved. Then Alvarez's voice cut through. "All stations, status." Reports trickled in. Wounded, yes. Dead, no. Ellie exhaled, chest heaving. When the helicopters came, their rotors thundered through the canyon, blades chopping the night air. The team loaded up, carrying their wounded, weapons slung. Ellie climbed aboard last, eyes scanning the darkness one more time before pulling herself inside. As the bird lifted, she felt eyes on her. Rourke, pale and bleeding but alive, managed a weak grin. "Hell of a medic, Harris." She nodded once but said nothing. Across from her, Alvarez studied her in silence. No smirk, no doubt, just thought. Back at base, after the wounded were rushed to med, the team debriefed in silence, exhaustion pressing down on every shoulder. Alvarez finally spoke. "You kept us alive tonight," he said, voice low but certain. "Not just Rourke, all of us." Ellie shifted in her chair. "Just doing my job, Chief." He shook his head. "That wasn't just a job, that was instinct, training, patience. You've got what it takes, you belong here." The words struck harder than gunfire. She belonged. But even as relief washed through her, another voice whispered in her chest. For how long? Because belonging wasn't permanent. It had to be proven every day. And in the world she had chosen, every day carried the risk of being the last. That night, as she stripped gear in the quiet of her bunk, Ellie sat with the weight of it all. The battle, the blood, the trust she'd seen in Rourke's eyes, the recognition in Alvarez's voice. She wanted to believe it was enough, that she was enough. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The desert wasn't finished with her. The war wasn't done testing her. And the ghost she carried, of Montana, of the compound, of every doubt whispered in Chow halls, still walked beside her. She closed her eyes, rifle resting within reach, and whispered to herself the only truth that had ever carried her this far. Patience, one day at a time. And somewhere in the silence her father's voice seemed to answer. "That's all it takes, Ellie. One day, one step, one shot." But the next day, the next mission, the next storm, would test her in ways even Montana had never prepared her for. The briefing room was quiet in that tense, loaded way only combat teams understood. Maps spread across the table. Radios hummed faintly in the background. Ellie Harris sat at the far end, rifle propped against her chair, eyes fixed on the target photo. A cluster of buildings, hardened walls, hostile territory. The mission was clear. Intercept a high-value target responsible for coordinating attacks across the region. Intelligence suggested he was on site tonight, heavily guarded. Infiltration by night, precision strike, exfil before dawn. Simple words, deadly reality. But what made the room heavy was not the target. It was the empty seat at the head of the table. Senior Chief Alvarez, their leader, was down, injured from the last operation. Command had assigned another officer, but delays and miscommunication left the team in limbo. Someone had to step up. And all eyes, whether they wanted to or not, kept sliding to Ellie. She felt it, the weight of their silence, the unspoken question hovering like smoke. Finally, Rourke broke it. His legs still bore scars from the Wadi ambush, but his voice carried steady. "Harris knows terrain better than anyone here. She's been patient. She's been right. She should take point." A ripple of tension crossed the room. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. Ellie felt her stomach tighten. Leadership wasn't a medal you were handed. It was a burden you carried, and she had sworn to herself she would never again walk into hell alone. But the silence demanded an answer. She exhaled slowly. "If I take point, we move with discipline. We don't rush. We adapt. And if anyone doesn't trust me, say it now." The room stayed still. Trust was fragile, but in that moment it was enough. Night swallowed them whole as they moved toward the compound. Ellie led from the front, every step measured, every decision weighed. Her mind flicked back to Montana hunts, to her father's lessons. Read the ground, trust the shadows, let the silence speak before you do. She read it all now, tracks in the dirt, the unnatural stillness of the air, the faint shimmer of tripwires catching moonlight. The team followed her hand signals, shifting like shadows. Not one word was spoken, not one wasted movement. They reached the outer wall undetected. Ellie crouched low, eyes scanning. 2 guards by the gate, another packing the roof line. She raised 2 fingers, then pointed left. Flank, silent takedown. The team moved like water, slipping through cracks, striking with precision. In less than a minute, the wall was theirs. But the hardest part still waited inside. They breached the compound, rooms exploding into controlled chaos. Gunfire cracked, shouts erupted, flashes of light tore at the night. Ellie's world narrowed to corners and doorways, every sight picture precise, every trigger pull a deliberate choice. Through it all, her ears stayed tuned for more than gunfire, for the cries of the wounded, for the shifting rhythm that told her the tide of the fight. Then she heard it, a voice shouting in the back, foreign words laced with urgency. The target. She pushed forward, team on her heels, weaving through hallways until they burst into a wide room. The high-value target stood surrounded by fighters, rifles raised. For one breath, the room froze. Then hell broke loose. Ellie dove behind cover, bullets shredding plaster. Her team returned fire, the room filling with smoke and chaos. She caught glimpses, the target ducking for cover, his guards firing wildly. "Frag out," someone shouted, tossing a grenade. The blast rocked the room, deafening, throwing smoke and dust into the air. When her vision cleared, she saw the target crawling toward a side door, 2 guards shielding him. Her heart hammered, the mission depended on him, but so did her team. She glanced left, Rourke down again, blood staining his shoulder. Another teammate pinned by suppressive fire. The choice tore at her, chase the target or save her people. The silence of Montana returned. Her father's voice again. "What's the point of the hunt if you don't bring everyone home?" She made her choice. "Cover me," she shouted, darting to Rourke, dragging him back, hands already working. Tourniquet, pressure, calm words through clenched teeth. "You're not dying here, not on my watch." Her team's fire thundered around her. Bullets cracked, men shouted, smoke burned her lungs, but her hands stayed steady. Rourke's breathing leveled. He managed a strained smile. "Always pulling me out, Harris." She squeezed his shoulder. "Don't make a habit of it." By the time she looked up, the target was gone. A surge of failure twisted in her chest. The mission objective had slipped through her fingers because of her choice. Extraction was called. The team pulled out under fire, bodies bruised, weapons scorched. They made it to the bird with their wounded alive, but not their prize. The debrief was brutal. Command didn't shout, they didn't have to. Their disappointment was quieter, heavier. "The mission was the target," one officer said coldly, "and he escaped." Ellie stood at attention, uniform dust-stained, eyes forward. "Sir, we had wounded. If I'd pursued, they'd be dead." "Dead operators are the cost of war," the officer snapped. "The target would have saved lives in the long run." Her stomach clenched. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream that lives weren't numbers, that she had chosen the only path her heart could bear. But she stayed silent. When the briefing ended, the officers filed out, leaving her alone in the echo of their judgment. Her hands trembled for the first time since the compound rescue, not from fear, from the crushing weight of doubt. Had she chosen right, or had she failed? The door opened behind her. Rourke stepped in, arm bandaged, face pale but alive. "You saved me," he said simply. Ellie shook her head. "I lost the target." He shrugged weakly. "Command will always want the target, but the team will always want you. Don't forget that." His words hit harder than any reprimand. Because deep down she knew her choice had been right. But in war, right and wrong blurred until both cut deep. That night Ellie walked outside, desert wind curling around her again. The stars burned overhead, cold and endless. She thought of her father, of Montana hunts, of patience, of silence. And she realized the truth no one would write in reports. Sometimes the mission wasn't the target. Sometimes the mission was bringing your people home. But that truth came with a cost. The whispers had already started again, that she wasn't decisive enough, that she let emotion sway her, that she was too human in a world that demanded ruthlessness. She leaned against the wall, rifle at her side, and let the whispers sink deep. Proud, broken, both always. And as the desert wind swept dust across her boots, she whispered to the night the question she feared most. How many times could she make those choices before the cost broke her completely? Years passed, the war shifted, then shifted again. Bases changed. Missions blurred into each other. Names were added to walls, medals handed to families, silence filling the spaces between. And through it all, Ellie Harris endured. She never chased the spotlight, she never wrote her own legend. She moved quietly, the way she always had, through ridgelines, through shadows, through halls where people still whispered when she passed. To some, she was still the cook. To others, she was the rogue sailor who had broken rules. And to a few, she was the reason they were alive. But to herself, she was something simpler, a woman carrying scars that medals couldn't weigh. Her career wound on, each year layering new roles, new burdens: combat medic, operator, leader, teacher. She bled in more places than she could remember, lost friends whose names she would never stop whispering on quiet nights. She stitched wounds in dirt, in helicopters under fire. Sometimes she saved them, sometimes she didn't. And always the question lingered, am I enough? The answer never came in words, it came in moments. Rourke, alive years after that Wadi ambush, raising a family he swore wouldn't exist without her. A young sailor she trained, whispering that if she could belong here, maybe she could too. Chief Johnson, older now, slower, introducing her to new recruits not as the cook, but as the operator who taught me what humility looks like. Moments, not recognition, not headlines, moments. On her final day in uniform, Ellie stood at the Naval Academy, the podium stark against the weight of history. Rows of young men and women in white sat before her, faces sharp with ambition, eyes bright with questions. She paused before speaking, scanning them. She saw herself in their faces, the hunger, the doubt, the need to be seen. When I enlisted, she began, voice steady but low, I wore the title of culinary specialist. People thought that was the whole story of who I was. They saw me serve meals and thought they understood my worth. She let the silence breathe. She'd learned long ago that silence often spoke louder than words. What they didn't see was Montana. They didn't see my father teaching me to hunt in snow so deep it swallowed your legs. They didn't see the years I spent learning patience, precision, resilience. They didn't see what I could carry beyond a tray of food. The hall was silent. And one day, 12 SEALs were captured. They didn't have time for proper chains of command, for authorization, for someone to notice the cook in the corner. They needed someone to move, and I moved. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. They called me reckless. They called me heroic. They gave me a reprimand and a medal on the same day. And the truth is, both were right. I broke rules, and I saved lives. Those truths live together, and I carry them both. She stepped away from the podium, walking slowly across the stage. The lesson isn't that everyone should be ready to pick up a rifle. It isn't that cooks should be shooters or that medics should be snipers. The lesson is simpler. Never assume you know someone's worth by their title. Never measure potential by what you see on the surface. People carry whole worlds inside them, skills, strength, pain. You may not see it until the moment it matters. And sometimes. She stopped, looking at the cadets, her voice softening. Sometimes the one everyone underestimates is the one who walks into the fire and brings people home. She let the words sink, let silence carry them deeper. Don't be so busy judging someone's role that you miss their capability, because one day your life might depend on it. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, but Ellie heard only the silence beneath it, the silence she had learned to trust. Years later, retired now, she returned to Montana. The land stretched wide as ever, ridges rising sharp against the sky, rivers winding cold through stone. She walked the old trails with her rifle slung across her back, boots crunching in snow that glittered under pale sunlight. She thought of her father, of patience, of silence, of the hunts that had prepared her for everything the Navy never expected from her. She thought of the SEALs, of the compound, of the night she chose to move alone. She thought of Rourke's smile, of Johnson's quiet nod, of Mitchell's faith. And she thought of all the whispers, just the cook, that had once defined her. She smiled faintly at the memory, breath curling into the cold air, because she knew now what they hadn't. That strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits quietly until the moment it's needed. That dignity doesn't always speak. Sometimes it simply acts. She set her rifle down, knelt in the snow and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Because she had proven, to the world, to the Navy, and finally to herself, that her worth was never bound to a title. It was bound to what she did when lives hung in the balance. And that was enough. But in the end, the story of Ellie Harris wasn't about medals or reprimands, about whether she had been reckless or heroic. It was about the truth hidden in plain sight. That excellence doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't announce itself with rank. It doesn't ask for permission to exist. It waits quietly, sometimes in a kitchen, sometimes in the shadows, sometimes in the heart of someone no one notices, until the moment comes when it can no longer stay silent. And when that moment comes, the world learns a lesson it should never forget. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the fight isn't the one with the loudest title. Sometimes it's the one everyone underestimated, until she walked into hell alone and came back with 12 lives in her hands. The snow whispered around her boots as she rose, slinging her rifle again. The sky stretched wide, endless and indifferent. And Ellie Harris walked on, steady and silent, carrying the weight of it all with the same patience that had carried her through every step of her life. Because patience was never about waiting. It was about enduring. And she had endured.